Hello, I'm Robert for Doomsday Debunk on Facebook, where we fact check the stories that scare people and look at what the true situation is, and look at the peer-reviewed science and the most reputable sources about it, and find out what the situation is for scared people. And this is a book that's coming up in the bookshelves in the UK where I live, and I've been told it is now for sale in W.H. Smith's, and it's by Penguin Books. And look, it's got a line over a penguin, as if penguins are going to risk them going extinct. So I'll just talk quickly about the penguins first. We don't. The emperor penguin, then it's near threatened, and vulnerable is the point at which it has perhaps a 10% chance of extinction by 2100. This is not at that point yet. And they need care. The penguin experts say that we have to be very careful and work on helping the penguins. But it's not like that they're just about to go extinct in 25 years or in 5 years or whatever the Extinction Rebellion people say. The African penguin is somewhat more endangered, and the various penguins, and some of them are significantly affected. And so I'm not saying there isn't serious problems here, but these people way exaggerate what the problem is. And first of all, I just want to talk briefly about the politics in this book. So they claim that the problem is capitalism and colonialism. This is not what the experts say. It is not a problem with us being able to buy nice things and lead a good life and so on. The problem is the way we're doing it, that we're doing it in ways that, for instance, we have incentives for destroying biodiversity. And the IPCC report about the million species extinct, they were saying that we have to change these so that they are incentives to encourage a circular economy with recycling. So you can have just as much of our materialistic lifestyle that we have, but with recycling and preserving the nature services. It's not about how we've got to go back. We don't have to go back to pre-industrial era, or don't have to stop capitalism. They're not saying that. The experts are not saying that. These are just activists saying that. And then we have to work in a much more coordinated way between the people on the ground who know about the local area and the governments. And the governments have to work between different governments with each other. That's what the experts say. So don't read Extinction Rebellion, read IPCC. I strongly recommend the IPCC report. That's excellent on what we really need to do. Because that's done 33, a third of those are social scientists. And they look at this very carefully. This is not by social scientists. This is just activists and one sociologist with very bizarre ideas, who I'm going to come to. And then they say, as in addition to that, they say we have to have a citizens' assembly. Chris knows why they decide. They say we've got to do things very quickly in a warlike effort with a citizens' assembly. Just some activists who are very keen on citizens' assemblies for some reason. Because why? Just think about it. If it's in World War II, do you think a citizens' assembly, not selected according to their capabilities, not selected according to their understanding of politics or science, but just randomly selected random people from our population, and then if you'd replace them by Winston Churchill and the government, then do you think they'd have done a better job? Was that the way to conduct a war? So, in the same way, this is not the way to act on climate change. And like doing it without science is a bit like in World War II, not basing it on intelligence. Just making up ideas about what you think the Germans are doing, and not actually knowing. And then you just make this stuff up, and then you start doing some attack. You don't take any account of. You don't take a look at the fortifications. You just rush ahead with a million soldiers storming into Germany, and they all get killed. I mean, that's not the way to do this sort of thing. You've got to, and so it's the same with climate change. We don't want to rush into nonsensical, stupid things based on ideas of people who are not basing it on science and not basing it on evidence. We need to look at what the proper scientists say and how they say we need to do it. So I'm just going to look at some of the really silly things these people say if you've got a scientific background. and if you've been following the climate science. And I've been interested in science and the climate since I was a child in the 1960s. I followed this subject as it grew up before we even had anything about climate change in the news. I'm not an expert on climate science, not at all, but I'm a science blogger and I've followed it and I know how to read a scientific paper. And I know what's nuts, I know what isn't nuts, and I can go to the right sources and find out what's nonsense. And so this is all based on a sociology paper which was rejected from peer review. And in this paper, it's no wonder that they rejected it. He didn't reject it like to the top quality sociological journal in the world, whatever that is, just an ordinary sociological paper to a sociological journal. And they didn't say you can't publish. They said this needs a major revision. It is not up to our standards. And then the author didn't do that major revision, so of course it was rejected. You've got to do the revisions if you put it through peer review. And it's no wonder that it was rejected. His main source on climate science, this Jem Bendel, is a blog post written by a systems analyst of a talk he gave to some businessmen, which has never been peer reviewed. He hadn't run it past climate scientists. He just put it up on his blog. And this is not a suitable site for an academic paper. It's no wonder they rejected it. And he has various other ones that are kind of junk science and not questionable or out of date. And this is one of the things that he says in Jem Bendel in his article. He has two main points as to reasons why he thinks that the climate is going to spiral out of control. And one of them is that he says that the Arctic ice is melting, which of course everybody knows, and then he looks at the solar heat input. He says there's more solar heat input into the Arctic region than there was, and he says there's so much more solar heat going into the Arctic region that all the efforts, the description of the IPCC in their big report in 2018 is incorrect. He says they haven't taken proper account of this, and that this heat will totally undermine any possibility unless we go down to carbon zero very quickly. And these activists are saying we've got to do it in 5 years. So he's just saying the IPCC is wrong in this unpublished, non-peer reviewed report. And now, if you look at this reasoning, and it is true, this is a change in solar heat, and there's more solar heat going into the Arctic region. But in this map, the orange and red means there's more solar heat going in, the blue and green means there's less going in. So you can probably see at a glance that just about as much of it, of the planet, is having more than it's having less. And then if you add it up, you actually find there's slightly less solar heat going into the northern hemisphere because of the reflective clouds as the world warms up, which more than compensates for the absorbing more heat in the Arctic region and in this region of the Atlantic. And then if you look at the southern hemisphere, the Antarctica, which is covered by this continent, and it's very cold and it has an anti-greenhouse effect, then that doesn't warm up nearly so much as the Arctic. And if you do the southern hemisphere, then it's significantly less, more reflective, significantly less heat over the period from 2000 to 2012. So far from what they say, just by focusing on the Arctic and ignoring the rest of the world, if you look at the whole world, then the world is actually helping the albedo effect over the whole world rather than the Arctic. It's actually helping us and making it somewhat less what we have to do. So we just got that completely upside down. And then also these people claim that that's why the Arctic got so warm. So they come much very exaggerated effects of what the albedo effect in the Arctic is doing to the Arctic, because but their idea doesn't work for the because for instance, I'm in the UK, Northern Europe, it's warming up here faster than it is in the tropics. Obviously, we can't cover it in ice sheets, and the sea isn't covered in ice. That's not why it's getting warmer here. The reason it's warming up more in Northern Europe and Northern Canada and so on than in the tropics is because in a warmer world, there's more convection from the tropics to the poles. It's just because there's more heat, there's more convection, more heat gets transported, and so the tropics don't warm up quite so much as the polar regions. and then intermediate latitudes also warm up quite a bit faster than the tropics. That's the real reason. So if you kind of average how much that's heated up and say that's the albedo effect, it's not. The albedo effect is a very minor thing. It is significant, but very, very minor, especially since the sun is low on the horizon and it's dark for half the year. So this is not science. These people aren't doing science. They're just making stuff up, and they haven't done it past the proper scientists. And then they say humans are going to go extinct. Now, if you look at the world, so okay, as I said, penguins, then some of the rare penguins are at risk, and we need to do work to make sure, but it isn't even for them, like, we're still going to have penguins by the year 2100. They're not all going to go extinct like the cover of that thing suggests. No, nobody's saying we're going to have a world without penguins. It's just some species are particularly in going worse, and we need to help keep the populations high for all of them. And if you look at the world by year 2100, so that penguin lying over is probably also key into this idea that the world would get too hot for humans. The idea would be too hot for penguins. That's not the idea. It's not going to be too hot for penguins. And so if you look at, this is what Greenland would look like. And if in the very worst case, if you had business as usual and you just kept going, pumping out carbon dioxide like we're doing now, and that's not going to happen because, if nothing else, competition with renewables, which are already undermining fossil fuels in many places over most of the world for already. So there's no way we're going to end up just pumping out fossil fuels and burning them all the way through to 2200, which is what this scenario is. Even then, there's practically no difference by 2100 in what it looks like from orbit of a satellite. You wouldn't notice from a satellite image hardly that it's changed. And this is 3000 after 2 centuries of business as usual before it all melts. And that is the worst aspect. It's also possible that there's a certain percentage of, I can't remember the number, there's a certain percentage of ice still there by the year 3000. And it is true that we may have crossed a tipping point, they're not quite sure where it is, where eventually all the ice will melt. But look, at the level that we're at, then by year 3000 it's still almost identical to what it is now. So if we have crossed this tipping point, it's a very gradual one that unfolds over many thousands and thousands of years, where eventually it would all melt. And we can actually do something about that. We could even do something about that in the second half of the century, a very low-tech way. We are gradually learning to grow more and more seaweed in the oceans, in places where we didn't before. It's traditional to China and South Korea, I think. And this seaweed farming, it actually takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and it also removes the acidification of the seawater. If we were to have big, giant seaweed farms of giant kelp, which we can gradually scale up to as we learn to do this more and more, it's very low tech, just strings with seaweed lying on it, hanging from it. So it's not an engineering difficulty. If we had very large areas of giant kelp, then in principle, there's a paper about it that calculates it, and it figures out that we could go back to pre-industrial by the end of the century if we wanted to, if we had large enough areas of giant kelp. So certainly over the period between now and the year 3000, even if it turns out that for some reason this is not practical for this century, we're going to be able to remove carbon dioxide if we want to. We don't have to have the ice hole melt even thousands of years into the future. Sometime, somehow or other, we can remove the carbon dioxide if we need to, even if we can't do it this century. And so, and if these people come on television, they tell you, we risk extinction in 5 years. Or if they come into schools, if you're a school child, they say, we could go extinct in 5 years. Then just remind yourself of this, just flash on this image in your mind, and you will just be able to completely debunk them. And if you feel like doing it, you can just ask them, do you have a site on that? And they won't have one. They don't have anything, unless they cite this Jem Bendel or David Wallace Wells's Uninhabitable Earth, which is just a journalist who got interested in climate science a couple of years ago. And he knows very little about climate science. He's not a scientist. That's, you just go through lots of errors. And climate scientists have said, you've made this mistake and this mistake. And he also just basically compiled news reports, and without really going to the science behind them, or if he did, not really understanding it. These are not people that you should use as a basis for making big decisions. They just shouldn't, how Penguin came to publish a book by them, I mean, honestly. And so then he claims that another claim by Jem Bendel is this Catherine gun hypothesis, which is, it was sort of it was respectable, but a lot of skepticism about it when it was first published a few years back. But there was, it wasn't disproved, but eventually it was disproved, and nowadays they just don't even look at it. And so this is the idea that there's methane in clathrates below the sea floor in the Arctic, and what these clathrates do exist, and there are large amounts of them, but they've been very stable, and we now know that they've been just releasing methane very slowly over a couple of million years. And this methane that they thought was just a new emission starting up because of climate change, it has always been doing that. And the evidence is just mounting more and more that there's very little actually going on there. You get little dramatic seeps, but you get that anyway. And this is just no longer considered credible that this is going to be a significant effect on climate change. So not a very significant effect like they thought then. Back then they thought that they weren't talking about 5 years in 5 degrees C in 5 years anyway. They're talking about 6 degrees C in 80 years. But it's not that either. And so now if you look at this is the 2019, the most recent IPCC report. And the IPCC, they do a review of the entire scientific literature. And if there was something that was respectable that said this would happen, and decent high evidence-based science, it would be in there. Even if it was low probability, they would say low probability scenario that we could have emissions that lead to a 6 degrees rise by 2100. That's not there. That's not even a low probability scenario. So now if you look at the extreme case, this of tundra and lakes increase markedly, extreme increase in ocean emissions, this would most likely be business as usual, not what we're on. But this is not according to this is according to the effects in the Arctic, and then it's even this could easily be no change, even with business as usual. I'll just show you that quickly. So these are the various ideas: high emissions, moderate emissions, and these are the dates of the models. And even through to 2018, we have the high emissions could be a net sink in the Arctic region, including everything in the Arctic region. This is of carbon, the other one is of methane, but this is including the methane. And it could, and with the moderate emissions, a sink is a sink possibility, and it's not like a very high source either. And then some think that with high emissions, it could be a larger source. So if you look at that, and then if you look at that and just look at methane, then if you look at the extreme case, extreme case, extreme of everything. Now, these are human emissions of methane there, and then there's a natural level that we have already, just the natural effects. And then if this and this is the different increases in natural emissions over this period. So if we continued with human emissions like that all the way to 2100, that's the level that we would get. And in parts per billion, so 2,500, 2,800 parts per billion, and there you go, 2,842. That is that's if the Arctic remained just no effect at all, no increase, no decrease. Now, that's with our current policies. If we have deep reductions, which are completely feasible and we can do, increase for a little bit, and then it decreases like that. And we're right down there by the year 2100. And that will help with climate change. Now, if we have the most extreme scenario extreme pessimistic scenario of natural emissions, then it takes you up to there, which is a little bit above the methane emissions we have today. And the total difference there is less than the amount of methane we have already. And in fact, it's less than the increase due to human emissions. That would be about the same as that increase since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And that's about the amount that we could have due to this methane in the Arctic region. So it's not true. It's no longer credible, this idea that there could be a significant sudden increase in temperature due to these methane emissions. So that is that. And then, and this is an interesting talk that I suggest you watch. And this is about how these people, like Extinction Rebellion, whether they actually believe this stuff or whether they don't, and they're just doing it in order to, or they half believe it, and they're doing it in order to try to get people to act. If that's what's going on, then this is not the way to get people to act. Saying extreme things just paralyzes people and makes them cause a disconnect. Saying these extreme things cause people to disconnect and stop actually doing the things that are actually helping. And this is a psychologist talking about this, and I'm informed that it is very well informed psychology, and I won't try to summarize what he says. I suggest you watch this video and hear what he says about how it's important to step away from the doomsday narrative and learn how to make caring for the world feel personable, doable and empowering with this fun, informative talk. So that's what you've got to do. You've got to make it seem doable, you've got to make it seem positive, and something that these people can do. And he talks about various things that psychologists have found about how to make that happen, including telling personal stories of successes and things that people have been doing that have been successful and have worked. And I think if I've got a list here, I think one of the best ways that I find to kind of motivate and feel encouraged about it is to go and look at. I'll include. Have I got it here? I'll include the list of deforestation. I've definitely got it in the other one. So my content, and then if I go and have a look at the that one, which has 11,000 views, so that's not too bad. I've hoped that more people will see it, but that's not too bad. So now if we go and look down, search for, there we are. So this is one of these nice stories about in China. This is a real photograph. It's not CGI. That's what it looked like in 1995. That's what it looked like in 2009. And the personal stories in that video, you can watch the video about it. And this the soil scientist John T. Liu, and he talks about it. And I suggest watching that as a good way to get motivated. And there are many other of these. I have many, and those other. I cover many other stories like that here in the article by the IPCC report, and then there are even more stories about it. I will include some links at the end of this video. So if you go to this video description, then I'll include some links, some positive stories like that, and just go and have a look and watch some nice reforestation, reversing desertification. Like for instance, they've been growing trees in Iceland. You don't think of Iceland as a place where trees grow, but apparently it did have trees originally, and the human beings cut them down, and the grazing and so on, and they're reforesting Iceland. And the warming conditions actually help, but you have to have the right kind of trees. So there's so many people around the world doing different things to help. So then, right, another thing I wanted to look at was the, this is an article I'm just preparing that I haven't yet put up on my blog. And this is about what I recommend. The other thing I recommend you do is go and listen to what the scientists themselves say. So for instance, the co-chair statements. The good news is that some of the kinds of actions that would be needed to limit global warming to 1.5 C are already underway around the world, but they would need to accelerate. So that's that psychological thing. She's talking about how we're actually doing this stuff and motivating people in a positive way by saying this stuff is going on already. We're doing it. We've got to do more of it. And that's the way you need to talk. And there's Deborah Roberts, saying this report gives policymakers and practitioners the information they need to make decisions that tackle climate change while considering local concepts and people's needs. The next few years are probably the most important in our history. This is how you need to talk to people. And limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is possible within the laws of chemistry and physics, but doing so would require unprecedented changes. But we can do these things. And then these people come to your schools and they tell you that you risk not going up. That's not true in the UK. We can actually, I talk about it in this other one about the XR climate, Extinction Rebellion climate activists. You can read that to find more about that. I don't want to get too much involved in that in this talk because it'll get too long. I'll link to that. But this is the kind of thing that we risk going the other way. So limiting global warming will make it easier to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And these are the goals. For instance, no poverty, zero hunger, good wealth and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. So this is the positive things we can actually do with that. We can't be in a world with zero hunger. The UN has that as an objective. Oh yes, I don't know how that happened, but this is showing how we've look how these are the death rates of children under age 5, and what do you think is the leading cause of death in places like sub-Saharan Africa? And the answer is for children under 5. These are children under 5, and that's what they're dying of, and we're managing to reduce it significantly. Leading cause of death is diarrhea. It's completely preventable. Very easy interventions that stop it. And that, I believe to the day, 1 in 9 of the children who die of 1 in 9 of children worldwide are still dying of and before age 5, and it includes easily preventable deaths. And we're having this great progress. This is it's nothing to be really kind of proud of, because we should be doing much better than this. But we certainly we are significantly improving. Look how these numbers are going down. But that number is still higher than even this one, which is Northern Africa and Western Asia. And look how it compares with Europe. And these are neonatal. These are in the first 28 days. So that's if you take the 0 off that, then it's a percentage that's 4%. For dying, it's going down to about 3%, and UK it's a fraction of a percent, and it's going down all the time. It's a very small number. That's Australia, New Zealand, and that's Europe. So this is what we are doing, and we need to keep on doing in that direction. If we can limit climate change, the impacts of climate change, so it's not going to affect on children in the UK. It just means things like. There is a possibility of some flooding damage. There's a possibility of more longer drought in the summer, and farmers having a nuisance. There's no risk even of having less food produced in the UK. It's actually, they find up to even significant amounts, high amounts of warming. It's still in the northern latitudes. We have the longer growing season. It's nowhere near too hot. I mean, think about it. Like onions in the UK, onions grown in Spain. UK is not going to get as hot as Spain. Or it's the very worst, if you're very, very hot, then it might make as hot as Spain. So we're not talking about a world where it's impossible to grow crops. We just grow different things as it warms up. We have a lot more warmth, longer growing season. We actually can grow more food in the UK and in a warming world. And we can actually grow all the food that we need in the UK. It's just, I talk about that in my other blog posts. You have a look at that. I have a video about that. Don't want to go into that in detail, but again, these Extinction Rebellion people, they come to tell school children that we're going to run out of food in the UK. I mean, in World War II, we managed to feed everyone pretty much growing only our own food. We can do the same again. Not only that, and some of the experts, some people look at this, they think we could even do it without having to ration meat. It's possible if we did have to reconfigure it. The main reason we can't do that is because we're exporting vast amounts of milk, and we export enough milk for more than double our population. And we do that by feeding our cows with grain, and we also export a lot of beef, and again, getting them to grow quickly, feeding them with grain. Anyway, so I took that separately. So anyway, that is what we risk. That's what he's talking about, is that we risk not being able to, and that is what we can do. We can reduce the challenge impacts on ecosystems, human health and well-being, make it easier to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The worst case is that we stop these improvements, and if it's very worst case is that they start going the other way, and we mustn't let that happen. And so when you talk, and that's what Dr. Tamsin Nitter, if you look at her, I don't think Rupert Reed understood this. There's nothing in the conversation that suggests he understood this. Rupert, I am shocked at this talk. Please stop telling children they may not grow up due to climate change. It is wrong, and deflects from the fact it is poor people who are at risk due to inequality exacerbated by shifts in weather. So they're poor already because of the inequality, and then the shifts in weather and the stress on their communities due to climate change and the droughts and because they haven't adapted well enough because they can't afford to adapt. And so these are the sort of problems that we can have. So it's a combination of adapting and stopping the zero emission, because that's by far the most cost-effective way, going down to zero emissions. There are many effects in the UK as well. We have many self-centred reasons to do it as well. But we do not risk people dying of this. It's only the poor people that risk of actually dying of climate change because of reversing of the Sustainable Development Goals.